The sea took my mother. The first time I saw death, it was in my father's eyes. I was 10 when Boko Haram stormed our village in Borno. The gunshots woke me up. My mother grabbed my hand, whispering, "Dustin, don't let go." But I saw my father stand at the door, a machete in his trembling hands, as men with rifles and burning eyes rushed in. The last thing I remember was my mother dragging me out the back, her cries swallowed by the night. We ran for days, weeks, through forests, villages, and deserts until we reached Agadez in Niger. From there, we found a smuggler who promised to get us to Europe. "A new life," my mother whispered, her tired fingers brushing through my hair. "Your father wanted this for you. Libya was a nightmare. I saw men beaten to death, women disappear in the night, and boys my age forced to work like donkeys. But my mother, she shielded me. She begged, worked, and starved so I could eat. And when the night finally came for us to board that boat to Spain, she held my hand just as tightly as she did the night we lost my father. But the sea doesn't care who you are. Halfway across, the boat cracked like dry wood. People screamed, clawing for anything to keep them afloat. My mother grabbed me, her arms wrapping around my body, keeping my head above water. "Dustin, listen to me," she said, her voice shaking. "You must live, no matter what. Do you hear me?" I screamed as she pushed me up onto a floating plank, her face disappearing beneath the waves. I reached for her, but she was already sinking, her eyes locked on mine as if whispering, "Live, my son." That was the last time I saw her. I floated for hours, the salt burning my skin, my throat raw from screaming. When the rescue ship finally found me, I was alone, a 10-year-old boy orphaned by war and the sea. The invisible child. France was supposed to be a fresh start, but nobody tells you that being alive is not the same as living. I was placed in a refugee center, surrounded by kids from Sudan, Syria, and Eritrea, ghosts of war just like me. They gave me a bed, food, and a small notebook where I scribbled my mother's name every night before sleeping. Adana? I wrote it over and over again, as if writing it would bring her back. The streets of Paris were cold, not just in weather, but in the way people walked past me without seeing me. I learned French fast, had to. Speaking English or Hausa only made me more of an outsider. I made friends with other kids like me, boys who had crossed the sea, lost everything, and were now running from the one thing they feared most, deportation. You see, when you're undocumented, you're not a person. You're a shadow, a whisper in the system. And one wrong step, they send you back. Back to nothing. That fear kept me awake at night. The idea that one day someone would knock on the door and say, "Dustin, pack your things. You're going back." But back to where? My village was gone. My father was dead. My mother. I had no one. The letter that changed everything. One day, I was called to the director's office at the refugee center. A man in a suit sat across from me, tapping his pen. "Dustin, we have a problem," he said, folding his hands. "You don't have any legal documents. We cannot prove your mother was your mother. We cannot prove you belong here." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my skin. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means you might have to return to Nigeria." The words hit me like a bullet. Nope, my breath came out shaky. "I have no one there." My chest tightened. The room blurred, my hands trembled. The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "There might be a way," he said. "But it's complicated." I leaned in. "Tell me." I had to prove I was somebody. That my mother had existed. That I had a right to be here, but how? With the help of a kind social worker, I searched for records, anything to link me to my past. We called hospitals in Nigeria, checked old refugee databases, even spoke to people in Libya. Nothing. It was like my mother and I had never existed. But then something happened. One of the survivors from our boat, a woman, had been granted asylum in Spain. She remembered me. She remembered my mother. "She saved you," the woman said when we spoke over the phone. "She held you above the water until she couldn't anymore." Tears burned my eyes. With her testimony, we built a case. My mother's sacrifice became my proof. And after months of fighting, of fearing every knock on the door, I became someone. A boy with a name. A boy with a story that France could not ignore. The boy who swam to France. I stand at the Eiffel Tower now, looking at the city below. I am 15. My French is fluent. I go to school. I have friends. But at night, I still dream of the sea. I still see my mother's eyes, hear her voice whispering, "Live." So I do, and when people ask about my past, I tell them, I am the boy who swam to France.